This is a bad way to start anything, but I guess I have to be honest. I don't do anything anymore. I mean, that's a heavy statement to make, but it's pretty true. Not that this is a recent thing. It just got worse. I recently finished college, and like most graduates, I can't get a job. You know how it goes. You can't get experience without getting a job. You can't get a job because you don't have experience. It's a shitty cycle, and it starts to get to you. You can only keep yourself motivated for so long before the drive just disappears. And as I was saying, it got worse recently. Most of my friends have all found employment or moved away. It wasn't their fault that my social life took a nosedive. I just kind of stopped trying. It was like I was too nervous to even ask people to hang out. I had this unshakable fear that somehow, during the process of talking to them, they'd realize what a shitty person that I'd become. And that they had absolutely no reason to associate with me anymore. Even when I got the courage to ask someone out, I never actually wanted to go anywhere. I didn't have the energy to do anything. And the times I did somehow manage to leave my house, I became absolutely drained emotionally the whole time. So I just stopped leaving my parents' home. Sometimes I didn't even turn on the lights in my room, just sat in the dark, checking the internet, waiting for the day to end so I could sleep again. I've always been a dreamer. Maybe it's from having a creative mind or something. Sleeping was my way of getting out. It was the only part of the day where it didn't feel like I was a complete failure. I had no responsibilities. I could just close my eyes, rest, and not give a single shit about anything going on. It was a natural progression that over time I started sleeping more and more, and the dreams that I had while unconscious were interesting. And no matter what I did, I couldn't achieve a single thing in the waking world. It got so bad I couldn't even be awake for longer than 4 hours at a time. When you're sleeping that much, it becomes harder and harder to keep track of what was a dream and what actually happened. This consistent nap stuff went on for almost 2 months without interruption. Well, aside from various shouting matches with family members over how I'd become a burden, I knew I should have spent more time looking for a job, but it was like every time that I would go to try, my mind would lock up and I'd just get too exhausted to do anything, and maybe part of me had just accepted it was pointless to even try anymore. I suppose it was a matter of time before the stress of being alive got to me as I slept. Everything was so crystal clear. The images my mind played out were almost a perfect representation of the real world. I could feel the texture of objects, touch anything, and my brain would process it with such unbelievable clarity. Every dream started to feel linked together somehow, as if I was watching one story play out. There were always gigantic buildings, like skyscrapers, that twisted and turned in impossible ways. Sometimes they'd coil around each other, and it almost seemed like they were forming spider webs. Just looking at them gave me this dreadful feeling that they were going to collapse at any second. Around the inconceivable formations, you could always hear metal being grinded, stretched, and pounded on. The buildings themselves always seemed to be completely impossible to enter. It was as I looked at the buildings that I noticed the reflection in the glass. There, a figure, dressed in a yellow jacket behind me. I could never seem to find it when I looked for the source. Even in the reflection, all it did was stand there and watch me from a distance. I wasn't sure if it was even capable of moving. It just seemed to be completely bound to the reflection of the glass. When I was able to pull my eyes away from the glass, I found something else out about the world that I had visited at night. The dreams always had other people in it. I'd remember talking to them, but at no point would I ever call them anything. It was almost like they didn't have names. I don't even remember knowing anyone who looked like the men and women that populated the world in my mind. I'd spend most of these dreams doing normal things, eating, ranting, gambling on occasion. My dream friends seemed real in their own ways. They each had their own way of reacting to things. They'd talk about family members that I'd never met, or just go on about hobbies. It was the closest thing that I'd had to a real conversation in weeks. It just happened to be in my own little dream world. It was just like the time that I still had friends. Back when I had the effort to leave my house. Except for one strange moment that occurred in my dream. Without fail, as I was sleeping, one of the people would always ask, "Is it watching you?" In a sort of panicked tone. In this sort of panicked way. Once while I was in a dream about a drunken game of tag, it happened in between rounds when someone had stopped to grab a new drink. One of the people involved just grabbed me and dug his fingernails into my shoulder and just shouted the question at me. Even in a dream, the list of possible responses to that aren't very much more than a stupid, unfitting "what?" After that, the guy just looked at me, just as confused as I was. For a second, it was as if something was watching me. Slightly out of sight, but my eyes still picked up that yellow color. Things like that went on for a couple of weeks. I mean, sure, it was slightly unsettling, but it still seemed better than being awake. It was easy enough to ignore that one moment of disorientation. Still, maybe I should have paid more attention to what was going on around me. The buildings were changing slowly. It was almost as if they were growing out. They became more complex in the way that they were twisted and formed, and the sounds from inside rumbled louder and louder. Once I had noticed the change, it was only a few days before they had completely blocked out the sun. That's when my friends changed on me. They didn't ask me, "Is it watching you?" like one of them had every other single night. No, the panicked words that fell out of people's mouths simply became, "I should go now. It's here now." I didn't understand what was going on to make everything change. Sure, I'd been sleeping a little more than normal just to see how the dreams were going to change, but how was I supposed to respond when these delusions built itself as one thing and then all of a sudden changed completely? There stopped being people around altogether after a while, and the air carried an uncomfortable weight to it. There stopped being people around altogether after a while, and the air carried an uncomfortable weight to it. When I looked up towards the sky, I could see the buildings that entrapped it were slowly constricting. The idea of it all falling down stopped seeming like slight concern, and became an undeniable reality. The sound produced as everything shook and moved around in the world was unlike anything I've ever heard before. It was a loud pounding that made the inside of my skull feel as if it had been ripped open. Like something was slowly grinding away at my brain. Every dream after this point was just wandering through the slowly decaying land and trying desperately to keep my head atop my body. Every night I swear I could see the yellow thing move just barely out of my line of sight. It was getting brave, and almost letting me see it then. Still, any attempt to find it on my own terms ended up fruitless. It started to mess with me when I was awake. It stopped feeling like I had slept at all. My head would wake up pounding just like it had been in the dream. At a point, I just tried to do anything to avoid sleeping. At least while I was awake, I could numb the sting inside of my skull with painkillers. The only problem was when you're downing 3 pills every 2 hours, it makes keeping your eyes open become difficult. Despite my efforts, I finally did fall asleep. And this time, the dream world was nothing more than twisted metal forming catastrophic hallways. The pounding sounds rang out all around. God, it seemed as if it was the very fucking heartbeat of whatever beast was consuming my dreams. I had to run. There had to be some way out of this place. The sound grew louder and louder as if it were testing my will. It wanted me to quit, sit down, and give up just like I had on every other aspect of my life. It was in my crazed moment of utter madness that I saw it. At first, what I had found was just a large opening. It was almost like the inside of a chapel. The metal twisted and formed in strange patterns that seemed to symbolize something that was beyond my grasp of understanding. In the middle of the room was where I saw it. It looked like a man in a yellow raincoat. It was in a moment of complete fucking stupidity that I yelled, "Hey!" at it. A profound feeling of regret instantly filled my stomach as it twitched and struggled to simply turn around. It was almost as if, after each and every basic function, it fell apart. One moment it was looking like some sort of human, the next it was closer to an animal. Each and every single breath this monster took caused my brain to scream. It was like my eyes couldn't process what was in front of me, and it was grabbing every memory, every thought, every single day of my life, and trying to make a shape. It must have known what was going on in my mind. There was a second among all the clashing occurring in my skull. I swear I heard it laugh. The wailing within my mind grew louder. It must have gotten closer. My brain wouldn't work. It couldn't tell my eyes to shut or my legs to work. I couldn't run. My eyes were locked onto it. They were still desperately trying to pin some sort of form to the monster. Through the pain, I somehow saw the texture of its skin. Something about it caused my mind to connect to the first thing I could think of. A goddamn raincoat. It was so close now. It hid inside of its hood. The outline of eyes stood barely buried behind the black tar-like liquid that leaked from its face. I could feel its breath as it got closer. And I was just trapped there as if my feet were hammered to the floor. I knew that this was where I was going to die. This is how it all fucking ended. I was going to watch whatever it was devour me alive with the jaws my mind were unable to fully process. I felt it rip at my skin. I saw my organs sprawled out over jagged shapes. Still impossible to decipher. No tears. No screams. I just watched my mind lose itself to both the sight of it and the pain of every single moment. The last sounds I heard were the grinding of teeth as it devoured my flesh. And then I woke up. Covered in a horrible cold sweat, I sobbed and screamed before I finally realized that somehow I was actually awake. Part of me wanted to cry tears of joy after that. None of it was real. I was perfectly fine and everything was alright. It was all just a dream. It was going to all be normal again. It was just a simple nightmare. And nothing more. It was freeing, in a way. It felt like it was all over then. No matter what happened next, it seemed like I'd faced the worst. Whatever that monster was, it was gone forever. I could get back to being normal. maybe even start leaving my house again. Everything felt like it was going to be fine. Up until that horrible sense of exhaustion snuck up on me. My eyes got heavy, and before I knew it, I was back in the chapel. My arms and legs bolted to the walls. No matter how much I struggled, there was no way to free myself, and then I realized it. Around me were the people I'd seen in my dreams, just as trapped as I was. And in the middle of it all, the beast in that fucking raincoat. He'd approach every single person pinned to the wall and slowly eviscerate their forms, pulling, biting, twitching in illogical ways as he did so. Every single movement that he made sent my mind into a dizzying frenzy. The crushing motion of every single step it took triggered a chorus of screams, slowly building and building until the second it reached me. Its neck snapped and twisted in an indescribable way as it struggled to turn its head towards me. Somehow, during all the screams and rampant panic, it allowed my brain one moment of peace. A single second to see his teeth curl into a grin before its hidden red eyes flashed an unholy red light. Before finally, I felt it. Its nails dug into my leg. I felt my muscles and skin slowly split before finally being ripped apart. I was trapped inside this thing's heart. It ruled here, a horrid god within a chamber of metal. Compared to that, I was nothing more than a pathetic piece of rotting meat, destined to face its jaws over and over and over. Something it would never let go of, once it had sunk its teeth into. Its claws and jagged fangs dragged across the metal walls behind me, through what remained of my shredded form. I learned one thing in those last moments. Finally, I knew what had caused the sound I had heard since this started. Every time I close my eyes to sleep, I find myself in his chapel, torn apart each and every night I dare sleep. While I'm awake, it's difficult to focus for even a second, knowing what monster eats at my dreams. It's getting to me. I've been trying to tell myself over and over again, it's just a dream. It just all feels real. I don't do anything anymore. I can't. It stops me. It has me terrified of even closing my eyes. I'm not sure how much longer I can even last. Even now, it's becoming uncomfortably tempting. It would be so easy. I would just have to down all those painkillers. That would stop everything. Then I could rest.